Hi there, I'm Judy Holland, and welcome to Happy Nest, the podcast where you can hear the latest research and best advice for living well when your kids leave home. Join me as I interview experts and explore how to reinvent yourself during this critical passage. I hope you'll head over to judyhollandauthor.com and check out my new book, Happy Nest, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home. Mary Ann Frank, my guest on the Happy Nest podcast today, had much more than the empty nest transition to cope with after her last child went to college. She also lost her husband of 28 years to a brain tumor. Then the nest was really empty and needed some real rebuilding. Seeking to make sense of it, like the clinical psychologist she is, Mary Ann tapped her talents as a writer, singer, and actress, launching a one-woman musical to tell her story. When I saw her perform her musical Spinning in New Haven, I felt a wrenching sense of loss and empathy. But at the same time, I was filled with laughter and joy. Her songs and stories are heartwarming and transcendent. I'm delighted she could join us on Happy Nest to share the wisdom and insights she's gained on this journey. I'm delighted that you joined us on Happy Nest to share the wisdom and new insights that I know and I see and I feel that you've gained on this journey.
Well, thank you for having me, Judy.
Yeah, you bet.
It's good to be here.
So your kids left. We speak to empty nesters here, and they all, are kind of jolted. There's a real jolt when your kids leave. It gets you thinking about mortality and how your time is precious and how you really better use it right. Your kids, when your last of two left home for college, I know that you were looking forward to renewing your romance and your marital bond with your husband, but instead you got a terrifying diagnosis. Tell me about that.
So I am the mother of 24-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. My daughter left for college the year before my son did. And in that transition, Judy, I was already planning to write a musical, a one-woman show about the empty nest. What I say now is, little did I know how empty my nest was about to become. The void in my life after the children left was significant. And there were just so many cuisines I could master. In the year after my daughter left for Brown University, I mastered the art of Vietnamese cooking. That was, I think, the end of it all. But when my son left, I turned to singing, which throughout my life has been sustaining during periods of dislocation and turmoil. This has been true for me since I was a very, very little girl.
Because you were an actress, this is so interesting to me because I've never done anything like this myself. You were an actress. You've been in a lot of productions. I know when we spoke before, you were in a production with Angela Lansbury, who I thought was so cool. I used to always watch Murder, She Wrote, and that's just such a great character that she plays. So you had you looked back into your past and dredged up or pulled back in your very busy life, pulled back your acting, your passion, your excitement, your creativity. What sent you scrambling for that? I mean, you're busy. You're a clinical psychologist. Don't you have people lined up, sitting down in front of you every day, wearing you out?
What I say is some mothers and some people make photo albums to honor the various moments in their lives. I build musicals, and I've been doing it throughout my life and throughout my children's lives. So I wrote an original 6th grade musical for my daughter and for my son. When both my kids were in high school, I wrote an original musical with original music called Balcony Scene. And so throughout this period of time when I was establishing myself as a clinical psychologist in New Haven, I never really stopped building musicals on the side.
That's just a source of joy and transcendence for you. It's the whole.
And as you said, and it's a place for me to make sense of things that are going on in my life and to to put all the observations that I have along the way of what it's like to build a family through various phases of development. Mm-hmm. So when the kids left, it was time for me to build a musical about Ralph and I exploring this new phase of our lives, this empty nest. And that's what I decided to do. And that sent me on a search. All of these things are quite intuitive. It comes from a deep need in me. It's not something I wake up thinking in my head. It's something I wake up feeling in my heart.
It's visceral.
Yeah, exactly. It's very visceral. So I was set up on a blind date with a very talented composer and musical director in Ridgefield, about an hour away, who was also facing the empty nest with his wife. And together we started to explore this idea of the sustaining power of song. It was 6 months into that development that Ralph was diagnosed with glioblastoma. And if you ask me why it is I continued to write the musical, I will offer you the same visceral response: because I had to, because that was the path our life was taking. And as a clinical psychologist, it's important for me to honor all the news of our lives, the good news and the very, very painful news that comes our way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so your show is called Spinning. What does spinning mean in the clinical sense? I saw something on your website, something about grief and vertigo. Do we spin, Marianne, when the kids leave? Do we spin to various degrees or at different speeds depending on how much a situation affects us or knocks us off balance?
Absolutely, and I think you would agree with me. We spin in small ways and large. Anytime we encounter, we move significantly beyond our comfort zone, it takes a while to catch up. We are testing all our coping capacities. We are testing our sense of the way the world is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. We wake up in the morning, we put on our favorite shirt, we put on our eyeglasses, right? The world is as it is. As Ralph said after the diagnosis, a diagnosis of a brain tumor is like a wrecking ball coming through all your expectations of how everyday life is supposed to look. Mm-hmm. And when all your points of orientation are lost, your sense of the future is lost. It is, the word I used is, it's like having vertigo. It's like you are on the edge of a cliff, looking down and not able to get your bearings.
Yep. But you, Marianne, you found another way to spin through your through story. I borrowed that line from you, of course, through story and song. And I understand what really struck me when I was watching your performance was understanding that you were working on that as Ralph was dying and knowing that he was dying, but it was kind of woven in with part of the process. How did this help you, you retreating to your art? How did this help both of you when Ralph was fighting his 14-month battle with cancer? And how did you grow spiritually or together as you're kind of blending all these things?
It's a wonderful question. And I will say it didn't happen right away. So maybe for 4 months after Ralph's diagnosis and when he was in the first phase of treatment, and it wasn't at all clear what would happen next. For the first time in my life, I couldn't sing at all. I couldn't remember lyrics to songs I had known since childhood. I can remember standing in my kitchen, unable to remember the lyrics to, like, Happy Birthday.
And you're the psychologist. Is that depression?
In part, it's depression, but it's also trauma.
Yeah, trauma. It can kind of short circuit. Maybe trauma short circuits you a little, huh?
And I was so in it with Ralph and in it with my children that there was really no room to do anything else but cope with the immediate demands of my husband and my family during a time of crisis, although I was continuing to see patients as well. I look back on it and I think, how was I doing that? But I think also that too was a point of orientation.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And then Ralph had a remarkable response to treatment. His tumor shrunk by more than half. Suddenly he was himself again.
A reprieve, a spark of hope.
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. And seriously, the morning that Ralph was diagnosed at the Smilo Cancer Center, I texted my musical director. I said, I can't come in for a rehearsal today. Ralph has just been diagnosed with a brain tumor. 4 or 5 months later, I said, I'd like to come see you and Janine and talk about where we're going to be heading next. Ralph was better. He was back at work. He was back on his bike. He was back in the lab. And something in me said, I need to sing to celebrate this reprieve.
But you knew it was a reprieve. You understood that a glioblastoma was a freight train. There was no thinking that it was gonna go away.
Never. So I want to make that clear to your audience. There was at its best, what one hopes for is what's called a durable remission. Mm-hmm. And that can last anywhere from 1.5 years to 5 years. But very, 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 very rarely does one live beyond that with the kind of tumor that Ralph had. So, and Ralph loved to hear me sing.
How did it help Ralph? Ralph had accepted he was dying, right? He completely accepted?
I would say it came and went.
Yeah.
And that was...
It's a hard thing to believe.
Yes, perhaps that was the most agonizing thing. So I feel very grateful that I had a relationship with a human being who maintained an enormous sense of optimism, while never sacrificing a sense of what was real and possible.
Right.
But when it's you and you have a brain tumor, denial comes and goes. And so in a way, one of the hardest pieces to live through was carrying the knowledge that he would ultimately succumb to this illness and I would live after him. But as you saw in the show, he was able to speak to both of our children about the life that they would have after he was gone.
Wow. Was there joy? Obviously, there's terrible pain in this process. Was there joy in the production of this? I mean, you really confronted this head on. You know, a lot of people back off and deny when tragedy strikes, but you went right into the jaws of this, working through the production with Ralph there. Was there joy or insight or new understanding coming? Because you're creating while something else is disintegrating.
Yes. Well, creating in itself is hopeful. And making sense of things, even very difficult things, is essentially hopeful for me and for Ralph. So I would say the most transcendent moment was when Ralph saw the show in process at the Home of Dear Friends. And it was there that I said to him, I've made you immortal. And he said, it's about time.
Wow.
And he, I think, was deeply gratified that his sensibility would live on after his death.
No, that's wonderful. So the show was almost baked when you put it on in someone's house, or I know a lot of actors and producers do kind of pilot runs, right? I've hosted a couple in my house, right? When it's almost there.
Exactly.
Kind of a focus group, sort of.
That's right. That's exactly right. So we called them living room performances in its earlier iteration because we didn't know exactly what was to come. The show lived in a sense of uncertainty. And it was called at that time just what the doctor ordered. And I didn't feel the need to predict the future. However, I did know, and Ralph and I talked about this, and I talked about this with my team, that we would rework the show after Ralph's death. And so we did. So this show has tracked with the experience that we have had almost in real time.
Which brings me back to the whole concept, the kind of jewels that we kind of pull from this, the new insights, you move through anything really grueling and frightening, and if you're paying attention, we gain new insight from these things.
Yes.
So
I
what
get
kind
to
of
talk about those new insights?
Yes, I want to know what you gained, because I look at this and I think that was so bold what you did. I mean, you really went at it head on. And again, you have this special talent that most of us don't have with acting and singing and that sort of thing, but you really faced it right on. How did that, this process, what kind of new insights or ideas about like wisdom came out of that?
That would be for other people to judge whether I'm wise or not. But I would say,
I think you're wise. Do I get a vote? Yeah.
You absolutely get a vote. I would say, if I may,
yeah,
both the experience of walking the walk with Ralph and writing the show left me with a bigger set of skills than I ever imagined. I had to be both the leader and advocate of Ralph's treatment team when he was undergoing the treatment for glioblastoma. I feel very fortunate that I had enough understanding of how medicine works and high-tech medicine works and how doctors relate, that I could manage that teamwork. We had a brilliant team of doctors. But I also led a team of enormously creative individuals, beginning with just an idea to a show at the Lone Wharf Theater, which is a major regional theater in New Haven, Connecticut. That the insight is how to work with people so that they will stick with a very difficult task and feel like it's enormously rewarding, and that I will make good on my promise to them. I feel like I'm
challenging yourself and expanding yourself, and
exactly.
And it's kind of scary. I mean, that's kind of a test, when we're not in college anymore.
Yeah, my psychiatrist. So one of the things that I did to stabilize myself was go back into treatment. It was extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Was saying to me recently that trauma often begets creativity and ambition.
Wow.
And if you had told me when my children left home, let's go back to the empty nest, that what would be revealed to me was the scope of my ambition, I would not believe it.
Yeah.
And I think that the death of my husband, something in the relationship with Ralph, kept that a little bit hidden from me.
Yeah.
And now it's not hidden from me.
So there was a comfort in the relationship, or some kind of safety in it. And without that, you're forced to develop new parts of yourself.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and not just comfort and safety, but creativity. As you know, you've built a family. And even when your kids are older, there's enormous creative gratification in shepherding a family through life. Right? It's a very big project. It's why we do it.
And it keeps on going. Don't tell them they're done at 18.
Oh, no.
I'm joking.
Yeah. Because being a matriarch is a very good thing.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's the thing that's so shocking to me, is how ambitious I've turned out to be.
Wow. So that's really interesting, and I didn't know that was a thing. I mean, I've seen that in your case, but I didn't know that was a thing.
Was that a thing?
I guess it is. So when we talk to other empty nesters, what else might other than creating their own musical production, putting it on in a city, what other things might people who come in all different flavors with different stripes, what other kinds of things, what's your kind of generic advice for, the empty nest really throws some people. I have a dear friend that lost her husband in the empty nest. What might you do to kind of recreate your world? Because it seems to me you've done a really amazing job in doing that.
Again, I like the way you framed it. It took so there's so many parts of that question.
Take a bite any way you want.
And there's lovely little bites I can take of it. So the empty nest is just one curveball that life throws us. So let me say first that as a psychotherapist, um, I am saying to people at all times, push up against the limits of your comfort zone a little bit every day and give yourself credit for it. Doesn't have to be huge.
Give yourself credit. That is I always hear, get out of your box, push your limits, your comfort zone, be brave. But interesting and a little different for me to hear just as a layman is give yourself credit for it. So talk about that. That's cool.
Yeah. So that is, people say that to me all the time. So people tend to be very quick to criticize what they're not doing and very slow to recognize the tiny steps they are taking to do the very hard work of rebuilding and reformulating their life. I am, I would say, one of my superpowers as a human being and as a psychotherapist is I can see those tiny steps. And I can observe them and underline them and give people credit for them.
You've been trained to see those incremental baby steps.
Well, you could say that, but I still am going to give myself credit for having it as a superpower.
Okay.
My husband used to say to me, oh my God, you can say things to the kids I would never get away with. So I can see often the leading edge of development in people. Comment on it, because if you don't have somebody looking at it, you can miss it yourself. You can think, oh, it's just, I'm not making any progress. It's so slow. I'm blah, blah, blah. But it's not true. People cannot help but develop. It's another source of enormous hope that if we're not deeply depressed, when we come through a trauma, if we get the support we need, we will develop. Yeah. We will develop.
Right.
So I think I got, was that an answer to your question?
No, that is an answer. And so you've also engaged in, to some degree, novelty, because a new performance, a new book, anything is a form of novelty. I mean, you've done other performances before, but you haven't done this one. You haven't evolved this way. And novelty, we know through all the research, I've done a lot of research on this, lights the brain up, makes us happy, that sort of thing. So
Can I say one other thing?
Yes.
It sounds like all of this just happened. And when I was writing Balcony Scene, this musical that I wrote when my children were in high school, was a multi-year project. It's like a dissertation, right? And I want to tell you that I stood in my kitchen in New Haven and walked around in circles for an entire year. I literally walked around in circles.
Oh my gosh, what did the teenagers think? I mean, they already think the parents are crazy at that phase. They must have thought you were really over the edge.
Well,
or not. When you have an actress for a mother, you just kind of go with the flow, maybe?
I have to be careful of my children.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So there were people who said about my show, I wanted to hear more about the kids. I said, that's their story to tell, not mine.
I told you that. Yeah.
That's their story to tell.
Right. Right.
And to give them the freedom I invited both of them to come to any rehearsal they wanted to. They had veto power over anything that they felt crossed the line into
They could edit. Oh, that's great.
They can. So the ability to tolerate long periods in the creative process when it seems as if nothing is happening.
Yeah.
For me, that's been a growth experience. That's been a growth experience.
So you mean through this process, which I think was really on steroids or exponentially more complicated, I'd imagine, than some of the other productions, through this, you've learned how to kind of more gracefully or perhaps a little less painfully charge in the direction of something creative and new. Maybe through, because you just kind of went through in warp speed through kind of a higher level, so you're a little tougher about this. And when you do your next production, you'll probably be a little cooler and calmer, and it might not take quite so much out of you.
Well, I think that the creative process always takes things out of us.
Right.
That's the good news. We want to be used up. So in rehearsal for the show, which is very different than creating the show, I did, again, an insight is I thought, oh, goodness, I live more within my comfort zone than I ever would have thought, because I was pushing myself to the nth degree every single day at every level. Now, that wasn't comfortable either. That's an exhausting experience, but still, it's a reminder that most of us in midlife and beyond can find ourselves a little bit skating the surface and not using ourselves up. And that was if there was an insight in all of this experience, because nobody loved life more than my husband, nobody, that I want to use myself up before I go.
Yeah, that's great. And go to the wall. And
Exactly.
We won't have, there's a book, I think there's an author named Bonnie Ware, and she has a book that looks at regrets of the dying. She was a nurse, and she pulled these things is a nurse. She talked to a lot of people who were in hospice, and she found out that regrets, I wished I had been bold enough to try that. I wished I hadn't just entertained that idea. I wished I had gotten off that comfortable horse and tried that. That's a big theme among older people.
One of the things that I was able to say to my children, and I ended up having to say things that nobody should ever have to say to anybody. When I told the children that their father had an incurable brain tumor, I said to them, your father will die too young, but he has lived his life fully. He has lived the life he wanted to live, and that's what he will want for the two of you. And it was true, because I only say things that are true. And they knew it. They knew it. So he at times paid the price for living his life the way he wanted to, but it was his choice to make. And remember yesterday we were talking about that sense of internal freedom. That's what he would want, and what I want for my children, that they are free to use themselves up in a very good way in their life, and be as creative as they can be.
No, that's wonderful. Well, wrapping up, and again, as we have had the great privilege to try to distill the insights and wisdom that you've pulled out of this whole situation, one more time. So what advice do you have for others who aren't actresses or maybe aren't going to write a book? Right. What's the advice? Yeah, that's my kicker here. In journalism, we say we look for a kicker. It's a wrap.
Always. So, my advice is, if life has given you a kick, right? Kick in the face. And even if it's the empty nest and there's no incurable illness to accompany it, give yourself time. The mind is slow to process, but as your curiosity returns, and it will move toward what interests you, move toward what feeds you, a little bit at a time, and give yourself credit for doing it.
That's great. That's
my advice.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to that. I'm going to type that and put that on my wall. I think that's wonderful. And again, you've got such a great combination of all this background in psychology and psychotherapy, and also with your acting skills, you're able to articulate it, which is why I decided that you would be a great guest for our Happiness listeners.
Well, I'm very honored that you allowed me to speak to you and to your listeners, and may there be more happiness to go around.
That's wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, and we will be in touch.
Great.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning into my Happiness podcast, where we explore how to get the best out of the empty nest. I hope you'll subscribe, write a review, and reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Check out my website, judyhollandauthor.com. Have a great day, and remember, make it happen.